Hello, everybody. Good morning, good day, good evening from wherever you're joining us. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Andile Madonsela, and I am still your host. And welcome to the AEN Podcast, which is entitled Welcome to the African Evidence Ecosystem. Of course, you have showed us a lot of love for episode 1 and episode 2, so we definitely had to give you episode 3. We still would like to hear from you, so please continue to interact with us on all our social media platforms using the hashtag AEN Podcast. So today's episode is about EIDM in different countries in Africa, and it will be a very interesting one. And without wasting more time, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, who is Ian. Hi.
Hi, Andile.
How are you?
Nice to be here.
So I'm going to start us off with just a very quick bio. So the first one is that Ian started his career in agriculture and has worked all over the world with government, private sector, and NGOs, hoping to hear more about that. And then the second one is that he's best known for establishing and running South Africa's national evaluations system, and is the founder of the Twende Mbele Partnership. Quite interesting things there. So as the culture of this podcast, we start off with icebreakers. Right. So I have like a few questions so that we can get to know you outside just the EIDM and evaluation stuff. So the first one is, if you could change your name, what would you change it to?
Well, I actually have another name, Sipiwe,
Really?
which was given me by Jabu Kanyile.
Really? That's an interesting story.
So maybe that could be the other name. I know you have used it.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. Okay. And then the second one is, what is the story behind your current wallpaper on your phone?
It's my two granddaughters.
Ah, cute. We love granddaughters. And then the third one is, what advice? So this one is a bit deep. It is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I have no regrets, so carry on as you did.
Oh, that's quite interesting. Okay, and then the next one is, if the sky could rain food, what food would you like it to rain?
I love pasta. So
Okay.
maybe types of pasta, whether it's lasagna or
Okay.
cannelloni or...
Just some pasta.
Pasta
It will
would
be
be
raining
good.
pastas. Okay, and then another one is, describe the perfect day for you. So if you were to have the perfect day, what does that day look
So the
like?
perfect day. So I have the fortune to live in the most beautiful place, which is called Simonstown, near Cape Town.
Okay.
And my days I really love is when I get up around dawn
Okay.
and I walk down, which is about a 20 minutes walk to the beach. And then I sit, and then I walk along the beach, and then I sit on the beach and I have some coffee and I have a toasted sandwich. And then I walk back and I see the most wonderful sunrises. And that's just the greatest start to the day.
That sounds nice. That sounds like the perfect day. And then a tricky one. What is your favorite? This is the last one. What is your favorite Amapiano song?
I have to say I'm not an Amapiano. I don't know. My son, sort of my daughter's partner plays Amapiano, but I have to admit I don't know it.
You don't know either.
So, but South African jazz, yes, but not Amapiano.
I'll send you a playlist so you can give it a try.
That'd be great. Yes, do that, Andile.
Okay, so those are very quick icebreakers. I hope you enjoyed them. Did they break the ice?
Yes, I think that was a very nice way to start.
Okay, straight into the serious things now. So I think last week, the last episode focused on EIDM as a career path for young people. And one of the points that I made, or we made, is that no one grows up thinking that they're going to be in the EIDM world. You know, it's not something that we're exposed to. So when you're young, you say, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a an astronaut. I want to be, you know. So no one says, I want to be part of something within the ecosystem of the EIDM. So how did you find this sort of evidence-informed decision-making? And would you call it that as well? Maybe you have a different name for it.
So how I really got into it was because in I joined the presidency in a project in 2009 on evidence-based policymaking.
Okay.
And was involved then in supporting initiatives in South Africa around EBPM, and then was absorbed into the new Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation when it was founded in 2010. And for a time worked in both, but then very much took on this evidence-based agenda within my work in DPME. And in DPME, I initially had a sort of troubleshooter portfolio, but then I was asked to develop the National Evaluation Policy. Mm-hmm. And having developed that, I was asked to establish the National Evaluation System, which I then did. And in establishing that, was very concerned that we did it in a way which encouraged the use of evidence. So we weren't just generating evaluations, we were generating evaluations which would be used and influence decision-making. And so we set up the system that way. And then as I sort of got involved in the system and we got the system of delivery of evaluations working, I started working much more on how we create the environment by which they would be used. And for example, we created a course on evidence-based policymaking and implementation, which Director Generals, Deputy Director Generals, Chief Directors, some directors attended. And we did this to try and create a culture where senior managers would be interested and supportive of evidence, monitoring and evaluation evidence, but also wider evidence. And so that's really got me into it. And then when I finished my stint in government, actually at that stage, I thought I wanted to really reflect about what were the lessons around the use of evidence. And that's when I worked with a number of people, including Lawrence Langer of SACE, on the book on evidence-based policy, using evidence in policy and practice in Africa.
Mm-hmm. And we will get into the book just now. But maybe before we get into the book, how would you explain evidence-informed decision-making to someone who's never heard of evidence-informed decision-making before?
So I think just simply using the best available evidence to inform decisions and practice.
We love simple. I love that definition. So let's talk about the book. So you looked at EIDM in 5 countries in Africa. What did you learn from that process and how was that like?
So I think one of the first things was before we did the work, we actually developed the analytical framework, which Lawrence put a lot of time into. Mm-hmm. And that was really, really helpful. I found that very insightful. It's not the simplest thing for people to take on board, but I found it very powerful in trying to understand what we were trying to do and being much more purposive about how you encourage evidence use. Okay. So the first thing was that analytical frame, which is very helpful. And out of using that, one of the things I think is very helpful, it talks about using evidence, then the change mechanisms, and then it talks about use interventions. What are the interventions what actually undertakes to encourage use? And trying to be purposive about the use interventions rather than just generating the evidence is one of the key lessons, I think, and trying to help people to think consciously about how they build the motivation, the opportunity, and the capability to use evidence. So I think that's very important. It also, one of the things we brought out in that framework was the importance of context and the macro context and then the context of the individual organizations. And that was I think some really interesting stuff came out about that. Another is about the importance of soft skills to build relationships and facilitate change. And one of the direct results of the book was developing some thinking around knowledge brokering and running training in knowledge brokering, which we did with Twende Mbele. And I think that's a positive area which we've sort of done more on since. And I think another lesson was about the importance of systematizing the demand for evidence. For example, we could really see where in the countries which had national evaluation systems, Benin, Uganda and South Africa, how it was pushing to get evaluation used in practice, where countries that didn't have that, it was much more difficult.
I can imagine. What are those 5 countries? For those who have not read the book, you should read the book if you haven't.
and it's available open access, so we made sure of that. So the countries are South Africa, and there's 2 case studies from South Africa, Uganda, and there's 2 case studies from Uganda. Mm-hmm. There's Benin, there's Ghana, there's Kenya, and there's also the ECOWAS countries of West Africa. So it's 5 countries and then the region of West Africa.
Okay. And then what did you find works well in sort of promoting evidence-informed decision-making in these countries? I think you mentioned one of the reasons, but maybe what are some of...
Yeah, so I think one of the things is people understanding the consequences of not doing it in terms of wasted money and the lack of impact that government programs, for example, are having on citizens. And for example, one of the things I've used very much in for example, in the training on evidence that we ran was a slide on the first 10 evaluations that we did in government and how many of those showed that those programs needed major changes. And the reason they needed major changes because it was poorly designed, often because the diagnosis was not done effectively and evidence wasn't used properly in the design of the programs. So that's, I think, one of the important things. And then work that I've really used very extensively, including recently in Uzbekistan, is understanding how you can use evidence at different stages of the policy cycle and different types of evidence at different stages. And it's not just at the beginning or just at the end, it's all through the whole policy cycle.
Oh, nice takes there. And then my next question is around what are some of the areas that you've identified need improvement?
So I think generally it's the understanding by senior management, and I think not only senior management but also politicians of how using evidence can lead to better development outcomes. And better development outcomes will mean that they do better in their performance agreements, that departments, ministries will deliver better, and that citizens will be happier. And that should result in more votes. So trying to get the equation between better development and more votes so that decision makers see that if they use evidence and get those better decisions, it's going to lead to a virtuous circle.
That speaks to... mechanism 1, right? Raising awareness.
Yeah.
And like sort of that political buy-in.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then my next question is around what are some of the mechanisms, quite nice that I just said mechanisms, which were used to promote evidence use? I mean, there's different ways that you can go about trying to promote evidence use, but sort of what are some of the mechanisms that you found?
So I'm not taking it from the framework, but just talking in a more general sense. I think one of the ways, for example, that came out, one of our case studies was at a parliamentary committee in Kenya, engaging citizens and citizen evidence and evidence from NGOs in the revision of an act around wildlife conservation and management. And so what's often underappreciated is the role of citizen evidence. And I think that was very interesting in that example. Another thing I think generally is that often the evidence suppliers have very much a supply-driven approach. And they're trying to get policymakers to adopt research that they've done or valuations that they've done, but the policymakers didn't ask for the evidence. And so moving to a much more responsive system where one's getting policymakers to enunciate the sort of evidence needs they have, the things they need to learn about and how evidence can support them, and then finding ways to be able to support that evidence. So one of the cases in the book is about the rapid response system being run by, and the rapid synthesis system being run by ACRES at Makerere University. And I think it's such an outstanding example. But for example, I've been working a lot now on promoting rapid evaluations. I'm going to be training next week in Mpumalanga, for example, on rapid evaluations. So trying to encourage people to think about more rapid ways to develop the evidence and feed it into decision making. And another thing I think is that the importance of involving different stakeholders. And so, for example, in the case study on Benin, farmer associations weren't initially, there was an evaluation done of agricultural policy in Benin, and initially farmers associations weren't very involved. But when they got more involved later, the work became much more powerful and was taken much more seriously. So very important to involve the beneficiaries and not just the experts.
I love the first point you made around citizen sort of evidence, citizen engagement. I think that is one of the points as well that came up on the first episode with Prof. Rich Stewart. But then are there any innovative ones? I know you just said involving like the citizens, but any innovative mechanisms that you have found and you thought, wow, this one is quite different?
Well, I think, for example, the rapid synthesis work that's happening at ACRES is very unusual in an African context. There's not many places that happens. South Africa, it's happening, and Cameroon a bit, it's happening, but it's not happening in a widespread way. And there's a huge amount that could be done there. And I think it's a very important aspect that needs to be looked at. And as I mentioned, also like the rapid evaluations, I think we need to be looking to that as a different way of instead of thinking about the traditional evaluation systems, which are often derived from the ways that development agencies do evaluation, rather than thinking about how policymakers need evaluation.
Okay. Interesting. And then what do you see the future of EIDM in Africa? We love the future. We want to know what's coming.
So where I've got to in the stage of my career is I see the world moving to a very, very troubled place. Not just Africa, the whole world. The economic system we have is extremely destructive. It leads to, it's causing inequality. Inequality is not a byproduct. It's causing inequality, and it's causing climate collapse. And so to me, the huge issue at the moment is how we bring climate, ecosystems, and inequality to the foreground of decision making. So a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment is about trying to bring evidence around that into all decision making processes. So it's foregrounded rather than it's somewhere at the back. Oh, well, if you're doing something on the environment, you should think about these things. But realizing that the way our system works is causing collapse of the system for humanity. And it is so urgent, and action is needed so quickly, and it's not being taken with the seriousness it needs to be taken.
It's quite sad, but hopefully we'll get there. So one last question. How do you want to be remembered now that you've given us this very wide knowledge on the EIDM and the work that you've done? And it seems like you've done quite a lot, but then what is that one thing you want to be remembered as?
I just like to feel that I've made a contribution. That's in my small way, that there's been a difference that I've managed to contribute towards making the world a better place.
I love that. I really love that. Any closing remarks? Like, what's that one last thing you want to say to our audience?
I think maybe to say to the network members, the AEN is a really important network. I think it's making a great contribution in Africa, and carry on the good work.
Thank you so much. And that's it. Please make sure that you continue to interact with us on all social media platforms using the hashtag AEN Podcast. Until I see you again. Bye.